Every day, from the moment we wake until the moment we fall asleep, our mind is making choices. Some feel instant and effortless, like recognizing a friend's face in a crowd. Others require focus and calculation, like solving a tough problem or making an important decision. But behind all of this, Daniel Kahneman reveals, there are actually two systems at work. One is fast, intuitive, and emotional. The other is slow, deliberate, and logical. Together, they guide how we think, judge, and decide. Yet this partnership is not always balanced. The fast system often takes control, while the slow one steps in less often than we imagine. The result is a mind that can be brilliant, yet also vulnerable to mistakes and illusions. In part one of Thinking, Fast and Slow, we will explore these two systems, how they shape our perceptions, how they create confidence and coherence, and how they sometimes lead us astray. This is the beginning of understanding not just how the mind works, but how we might learn to see the world and ourselves more clearly. Introduction: the story of two minds. Imagine for a moment that you are walking down a quiet street on a sunny afternoon. The breeze is gentle, and your mind feels relaxed. Without much effort, you notice the bright colors of the flowers blooming by the sidewalk. You hear the distant laughter of children playing, and as you pass a cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee immediately catches your attention. All of this happens naturally, instantly, and without your conscious decision. You do not command your brain to notice these things. It simply does. Now, contrast that with another situation. Suppose someone asks you to multiply 17 by 24 in your head, without paper, without a calculator, and without help. Suddenly, your mind slows down. You pause, focus, and deliberately engage in a process that feels effortful. You might imagine breaking down the numbers. First multiplying 17 by 20, then adding 17 multiplied by 4. You keep track of the intermediate results, hold them in your working memory, and carefully arrive at the final answer. This second mode of thinking feels very different. It is deliberate, effortful, and demanding. Daniel Kahneman, in his monumental book Thinking, Fast and Slow, invites us to explore the fascinating dance between these two modes of thought, which he names System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, intuitive, automatic, and emotional. It is what allows you to notice a stranger's mood from their tone of voice, to recognize a friend's face instantly, or to solve a simple phrase like bread and with the effortless answer butter. System 2, in contrast, is slow, deliberate, effortful, and logical. It is what you call upon when solving a math problem, making a difficult choice, or carefully reasoning through an argument. Both systems are essential. One helps us survive by reacting quickly and efficiently. The other allows us to reason deeply, plan for the future, and check our instincts. But here lies the intrigue. While we like to think of ourselves as rational beings guided by careful reasoning, Kahneman reveals that much of our behavior, many of our choices, and even our deeply held beliefs are shaped far more by the rapid intuitions of System 1 than we might care to admit. The fast system operates with remarkable efficiency, but is also prone to biases, illusions, and errors. Meanwhile, System 2, though powerful, is often lazy, content to endorse the impressions and judgments formed by System 1 rather than to challenge them. The interplay between the two systems is at the heart of human judgment and decision-making. Kahneman himself brings a unique perspective to this exploration. As a psychologist who won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences, he has spent decades studying how people make choices under uncertainty, often revealing that the human mind systematically departs from the assumptions of rational economic theory. His research with Amos Tversky, a brilliant collaborator and lifelong friend, laid the foundation for what is now called behavioral economics, a field that challenges the classical idea that people always act rationally to maximize their self-interest. Instead, Kahneman and Tversky uncovered a catalog of predictable biases and mental shortcuts, showing that humans are not the flawless calculators that economists once imagined, but rather creatures of habit, intuition, and sometimes of error. The introduction of this book is not merely an academic overview. It is an invitation. Kahneman speaks directly to the reader, not as a distant scholar, but as a guide who wishes to reveal the workings of the mind in a way that is practical, engaging, and even entertaining. He explains that thinking, fast and slow, is structured around the discoveries that emerge from his lifetime of research, as well as the collaborative work with Tversky that shaped much of his intellectual journey. Through stories, experiments, and reflections, he offers not just knowledge, but a lens through which to view your own thinking. Imagine being able to catch yourself in the act of making a biased judgment before it happens. Imagine being able to step back and see when your mind is relying too heavily on intuition and when it should slow down to reason more carefully. That is the promise of this book. It does not pretend that we can ever eliminate our biases entirely, for they are woven into the fabric of our mental machinery. But it does suggest that by becoming more aware of them, by learning to recognize the patterns of our own minds, we can at least temper their influence and make better choices. Kahneman opens with humility, acknowledging that the lessons of his research apply not just to the general public, but to himself as well. He admits that even after decades of studying biases, he still falls prey to them. This confession is powerful, for it sets the tone. The exploration of our minds is not a path to perfection, but to awareness. It is about recognizing the limits of our rationality and learning to navigate them with wisdom. The introduction also prepares us for the journey ahead by outlining the structure of the book. The narrative is divided into 5 parts, each illuminating a different aspect of thinking. The first part introduces the 2 systems and their characteristics. The second part explores the biases of intuition, showing how System 1 can mislead us in predictable ways. The third part dives into the challenges of overconfidence and the illusions of understanding, revealing how our minds construct stories to make sense of the world, often at the expense of accuracy. The fourth part revisits classic economic theory, contrasting it with the psychology of decision-making, especially under risk and uncertainty. And the fifth and final part turns to the concept of well-being, asking what truly makes us happy and how our minds perceive the quality of our lives. Each part builds upon the last, weaving a tapestry of insights that are at once scientific and deeply human. Kahneman promises that along the way, readers will not only encounter experiments and theories, but also stories and examples that illuminate the mechanics of thought in everyday life. From simple word puzzles to complex financial decisions, from the judgments we make about others to the stories we tell about ourselves, the book paints a portrait of the mind in all its brilliance and all its flaws. As the introduction comes to a close, Kahneman reminds us that the value of these insights is not limited to academic curiosity. They matter because they affect our lives, our choices, our relationships, our health, and even our happiness. The way we think shapes the world we create. By learning to see our thinking more clearly, we gain not just knowledge, but the possibility of wiser action. And so, with humility and clarity, Daniel Kahneman invites us to take the first step into the world of thinking, fast and slow, to meet the 2 systems that shape our thoughts, to recognize their strengths and weaknesses, and to prepare ourselves for a journey into the very heart of human judgment and decision-making. Chapter 1. The characters of the story. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine that inside your mind there live 2 characters, 2 distinct personalities that guide your every thought and every decision. One of them is quick, impulsive, always ready to jump to a conclusion, eager to tell you what is happening and what to do next. The other is slower, more deliberate, cautious, and capable of reasoning through complex problems with care. They live side by side, constantly interacting, shaping the stream of consciousness that you experience as your daily life. Daniel Kahneman calls them System 1 and System 2, and they're the protagonists of the story he tells throughout this book. System 1 is the fast thinker. It operates automatically and effortlessly. You are not even aware that it is working, yet it constantly interprets the world around you. When you see a stranger's face and instantly know whether they are angry or happy, that is System 1. When you complete the phrase salt and with pepper without hesitation, that is System 1 again. It is the system that allows you to drive a car on an empty road while holding a conversation with a friend, because much of the process has become automatic. It is intuitive, quick, emotional, and deeply efficient. System 2, on the other hand, is the slow thinker. It allocates attention to effortful mental activities that demand focus, such as solving a math problem, completing a complex form, or comparing two job offers in detail. When you calculate 17 times 24 in your head, when you try to remember the name of a distant cousin, when you carefully check the logic of an argument, System 2 is at work. It is deliberate, rational, logical, and capable of self-control. But it is also lazy. It does not like to be called upon unless absolutely necessary, and it tends to trust System 1 unless there is a clear reason to intervene. To understand the difference between these two characters, consider a simple example. Imagine a bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Instantly, without effort, your mind likely suggests 10 cents. That is the intuitive answer that System 1 offers. It is wrong. If the ball costs 10 cents, then the bat would cost $1.10, which would make the total $1.20. The correct answer, which requires System 2 to engage, is 5 cents. The bat costs $1.05, and together they add up to $1.10. This little puzzle reveals the dynamic between the two systems. System 1 gives an immediate but incorrect response, while System 2, if it is alert and willing, can step in and correct the mistake. But here is the important point. Often, System 2 is content to endorse the answer provided by System 1, even when it is wrong. We are not constantly vigilant. Our mental energy is limited, and we prefer to conserve it. As a result, we are frequently guided by our intuitions and impressions, even when they lead us astray. This is one of the central lessons of Kahneman's work. Our fast thinking is powerful, but it is not always accurate, and our slow thinking is capable of correction, but it is often too lazy to intervene. Kahneman describes System 1 as operating effortlessly, producing impressions, intuitions, intentions, and feelings that are the main source of the beliefs and choices that guide our lives. It can detect hostility in a voice, complete a simple word association, or make sense of a story with little effort. It is skilled at constructing a coherent narrative from incomplete information, filling in gaps with assumptions that feel natural. This is both its strength and its weakness. System 1 provides us with a sense of confidence, but that confidence can be misleading because it is based not on a careful analysis of evidence, but on the ease with which a story comes to mind. System 2, in contrast, requires effort. You can feel in your body when it engages. Your pupils dilate, your heart rate increases, and your muscles tense slightly. If you're asked to memorize a long sequence of numbers, to park in a narrow space, or to monitor a complex situation, you can feel your mental energy being consumed. This effort is finite. When System 2 is occupied, we are more likely to give in to temptation, to make impulsive decisions, or to miss important details. Our ability to think slowly is limited, and we must use it wisely. To bring these characters to life, Kahneman offers an analogy. Think of System 1 as a storyteller who is always weaving a narrative about what is happening, while System 2 is like a fact-checker who occasionally steps in to verify the details. The storyteller never rests. It is constantly spinning tales, interpreting events, and offering judgments. The fact-checker, however, is often drowsy, unwilling to challenge the storyteller unless something seems particularly off. Most of the time, the storyteller runs the show, and the fact-checker simply nods in agreement. This has profound consequences for how we live. When we rely too heavily on System 1, we are vulnerable to biases, illusions, and errors. We may jump to conclusions, misjudge probabilities, or be swayed by irrelevant details. When we engage System 2, we can correct some of these mistakes, but we cannot sustain this mode of thinking for long. It is too demanding, too exhausting, and so our minds have evolved to rely on a delicate balance between the two. Fast thinking gets us through most of life efficiently, while slow thinking is reserved for the moments that truly require it. Reflect for a moment on your own life. Think of the countless decisions you make every day without even realizing it. What to eat, how to respond to someone's tone, whether a situation feels safe or dangerous. These are guided by System 1. Now think of the fewer but more deliberate choices. Selecting a career, managing your finances, resolving a conflict with a loved one. These require the discipline of System 2. Yet even in those big decisions, System 1 is never absent. It whispers in the background, offering intuitions, gut feelings, and narratives that shape how System 2 evaluates the options. The two characters are inseparable, constantly interacting, each influencing the other. As Chapter 1 draws to a close, Kahneman makes it clear that the story of this book is the story of these two systems. We will meet them again and again, see how they operate, and learn how their interplay shapes our judgments, our choices, and even our happiness. They are not just abstract concepts. They are the forces that govern how we experience the world. And as we continue this journey, we will discover that understanding these characters is not only intellectually fascinating, but also deeply practical. By learning to recognize when we are in the grip of System 1, and when to call upon System 2, we can begin to see our own minds with greater clarity and perhaps, just perhaps, make wiser decisions. And so, with the characters introduced, the stage is set. In the chapters to come, Kahneman will reveal how these two systems play out in real life, how they can mislead us, and how we might harness their strengths while guarding against their weaknesses. The story of thinking, fast and slow, has begun, and the protagonists, System 1 and System 2, are ready to lead us through the fascinating landscape of the human mind. Chapter 2, Attention and Effort. Picture yourself sitting in a crowded cafe. The clatter of dishes rings in the background. A low hum of conversations fills the air, and music drifts softly from the speakers. Yet across the table, a close friend is speaking to you, telling you an important story. Despite the noise around you, you find yourself able to focus entirely on her words, almost as if the rest of the cafe fades into silence. This remarkable ability to direct attention, to filter out distractions, and to focus effort on what matters most is one of the defining powers of System 2. It is deliberate attention, the kind that demands energy, discipline, and control. Daniel Kahneman begins this chapter by reminding us that thinking requires effort, and effort is a limited resource. When you engage in a task that demands attention, such as solving a math problem, driving in heavy traffic, or remembering a complex set of instructions, you can feel that effort in your mind and even in your body. Your pupils dilate, your heart rate increases slightly, and if the task is difficult enough, you might even frown in concentration. This is your body's way of signaling that your mental resources are being taxed. The concept of effort is not merely a metaphor. Kahneman and other psychologists have demonstrated through experiments that mental effort is measurable and that it has limits. For instance, try to count backward from 1,000 by sevens, 1,000, 993, 986, and so on, while at the same time keeping track of conversation. You will quickly realize that it is nearly impossible. Why? Because both tasks demand attention from System 2, and System 2 cannot handle them simultaneously. Unlike System 1, which can operate in parallel, managing multiple automatic processes at once, System 2 is constrained. It can focus only on one demanding task at a time. Think of attention as a spotlight on a dark stage. Wherever the spotlight shines, clarity appears. Outside of its beam, details fade into obscurity. The mind can move the spotlight quickly, but it cannot illuminate the entire stage at once. This limitation explains why distractions are so powerful. If your phone buzzes with a new notification while you are reading, your spotlight of attention is pulled away. To bring it back requires effort, and repeated distractions can leave you mentally exhausted. One of the most famous demonstrations of how attention works is the invisible gorilla experiment conducted by psychologists Christopher Chabris and Daniel Kahneman. In this study, participants were asked to watch a video of people passing basketballs and account how many passes were made by the players in white shirts. The task required focused attention. In the middle of the video, a person in a gorilla suit walked across the screen, stopped, beat its chest, and then walked off. Astonishingly, about half of the participants failed to notice the gorilla at all. Their attention was so consumed by the counting task that something extraordinary and obvious passed completely unnoticed. Kahneman uses this example to show how limited our attentive system really is. What we do not attend to, we do not see. Attention is also effortful because it requires self-control. Consider the act of resisting temptation. If you're on a diet and someone places a plate of warm cookies in front of you, your System 1 immediately reacts with desire. The smell, the sight, the thought of sweetness trigger an automatic craving. To resist, you must call upon System 2, engaging self-control and willpower. But self-control, like attention, is a limited resource. If you have been exercising it throughout the day, resisting distractions at work, managing your emotions in a difficult conversation, you'll find it harder to resist the cookie in the evening. Psychologists call this phenomenon ego depletion, the idea that self-control is like a muscle that tires with use. Kahneman describes attention as a scarce resource that must be allocated wisely. System 2 is like a manager who cannot attend to every task at once. It must prioritize. And because attention is finite, tasks that demand it are in competition. Driving on an empty highway requires little effort, allowing you to carry on a lively conversation. But when the road becomes crowded, with cars swerving and sudden stops, your attention shifts. You may pause the conversation or fall silent altogether. Your mental energy is reallocated to the task of driving because safety depends on it. This competition for attention has profound implications. It means that when our System 2 is occupied, we are more likely to make mistakes in other areas. If you're deeply absorbed in solving a problem, you might fail to notice a red light while crossing the street. If you are emotionally exhausted, you may agree to something you would normally resist. Our capacity to think slowly and carefully is not only limited, but fragile. Kahneman also points out that effort is something we naturally avoid. The mind, like the body, seeks to conserve energy. Just as we prefer to walk rather than run when given the choice, we prefer to rely on System 1 rather than System 2. This is why we so often accept the intuitive answer without checking it, why we go with our gut rather than engaging in careful analysis. Effort feels uncomfortable, and unless we are motivated, we will avoid it. Yet this avoidance comes at a cost. By shying away from effortful thinking, we leave ourselves vulnerable to biases and errors. The earlier example of the bat and ball puzzle illustrates this well. The intuitive answer feels right and is easy, but only effortful reasoning can reveal the truth. Recognizing when to exert effort, when to call upon System 2, is a critical skill in navigating life wisely. Reflect for a moment on your own day. How often do you truly engage in effortful thought? How often do you allow yourself to drift on the automatic current of System 1? Do you find yourself avoiding difficult tasks, procrastinating, or settling for easy answers because true concentration feels draining? These are the moments when awareness can make a difference. By recognizing the limits of your attention and the cost of effort, you can begin to allocate your mental energy more deliberately, saving it for the decisions and challenges that truly matter. As Chapter 2 draws to a close, Kahneman leaves us with an essential lesson. Our ability to think slowly, to focus attention, and to exert self-control is powerful but limited. It is the foundation of rational thought, yet it is fragile, easily exhausted, and constantly in competition with the effortless processes of System 1. To understand ourselves, we must recognize this balance. To live wisely, we must learn to guard our attention as the precious resource it is, using it where it matters most, and not squandering it on trivial distractions. The stage is now set for the next part of the journey, where Kahneman will show us not only how attention and effort shape our thinking, but also how the illusions of the mind, those quick judgments of System 1, can mislead us in ways that are both surprising and deeply human. Chapter 3: The Lazy Controller. Imagine a judge sitting high on a bench, overlooking the flow of daily cases. This judge has the power to intervene, to question witnesses, to demand evidence, and to deliver verdicts based on reason and law. But this judge is also lazy. Most of the time, he lets the lawyers talk, nods along with the story that seems convincing, and only occasionally rouses himself to challenge what he hears. This is the story of System 2, the slow thinker, the rational overseer of the mind. Kahneman describes System 2 as the lazy controller, because while it has the capacity for discipline and logical reasoning, it often prefers to sit back and endorse the quick judgments of System 1. System 1, the fast thinker, is always active, generating impressions, feelings, and automatic responses. It is like an energetic assistant who constantly whispers answers into the judge's ear. System 2 has the authority to override these answers, but because doing so requires effort, it often accepts them without much scrutiny. This tendency toward laziness is one of the defining features of the human mind. We like to think of ourselves as rational beings, constantly weighing evidence and making careful decisions. But in reality, much of the time we simply go along with the intuitive stories constructed by System 1. Consider a simple example. If you are shown the expression 2 plus 2 equals, your answer, 4, comes effortlessly. System 1 delivers it instantly. But if you are shown 17 times 24 is equal to, the task requires deliberate calculation. You must call upon System 2, engaging attention, memory, and logic. This effort feels tangible. You might pause, take a deep breath, and focus. Yet here is the crucial point. Unless the situation absolutely demands accuracy, you are unlikely to make the effort. In everyday life, you often settle for a quick approximation or an intuitive guess rather than engage in the hard work of calculation. This tendency toward mental laziness explains why we are so vulnerable to cognitive biases. System 1 delivers quick but flawed judgments, and System 2, instead of checking them, lazily agrees. Kahneman and his colleagues demonstrated this in many experiments. One famous example is the bat and ball problem mentioned earlier. Most people accept the intuitive but wrong answer because System 2 fails to engage. It is not that we cannot solve the problem correctly. It is that we do not bother to exert the effort. The laziness of System 2 is not merely a matter of convenience. It is rooted in the biology of the brain. Mental effort is costly. The brain consumes more glucose and oxygen when System 2 is active, and so has evolved to conserve energy by avoiding unnecessary effort. Just as our bodies resist running when walking will do, our minds resist careful reasoning when intuition feels sufficient. This is why people are more likely to make impulsive choices when they are tired, distracted, or stressed. Under such conditions, System 2 becomes even more reluctant to intervene. Kahneman describes numerous experiments where researchers place participants under cognitive load, giving them tasks that occupied their attention and memory, and then observed how their decision-making changed. For instance, participants asked to memorize a long string of digits were more likely to choose chocolate cake over fruit salad when offered a snack. Why? Because their attention was consumed by the memory task, leaving less capacity for self-control. System 2 was busy, and System 1's craving for sweetness went unchallenged. This laziness also explains why we are so easily influenced by context and framing. When decisions are presented in a certain way, System 1 generates an immediate response, and unless System 2 is motivated to question it, we go along with the framing. For example, people are more likely to accept a medical treatment when it is described as having a 90% survival rate than when it is described as having a 10% mortality rate, even though the two statements are logically identical. System 1 reacts emotionally to the positive frame, and System 2 does not bother to correct the inconsistency. The consequences of this laziness are far-reaching. It affects not only trivial choices, but also important judgments about money, health, politics, and relationships. A voter may accept a politician's slogan without questioning its logic. A shopper may buy a product because of an appealing label without examining its true value. A manager may hire someone who feels right, rather than carefully evaluating qualifications. In each case, System 2 could step in to demand evidence, weigh alternatives, and prevent error, but too often it does not. Yet this laziness is not entirely negative. If System 2 were constantly active, analyzing every detail of every decision, life would become unbearable. Imagine carefully reasoning through the logic of every word in every sentence you read, or analyzing every step as you walk down a street. The effort would be paralyzing. Our reliance on System 1 is not a flaw, it is a necessity. The problem arises when we fail to recognize when System 2 should take control, when we allow laziness to rule in situations that demand careful thought. Kahneman urges us to reflect on our own tendencies. How often do we rely on gut feelings without checking them? How often do we allow our intuitions to dictate choices that deserve scrutiny? And how often do we assume that because a story feels coherent, it must be true? The challenge is not to eliminate System 1. It cannot be silenced, nor should it be, but to train ourselves to recognize moments when the lazy controller must wake up and take charge. As Chapter 3 comes to an end, we see the two systems more clearly. System 1, always active, quick, and intuitive, and System 2, capable of rational control but reluctant to use its full power. Together, they form the fabric of human thought. The story of the mind is not one of flawless rationality, but of a lazy controller who too often defers to an impulsive assistant. And it is in this dynamic that many of our errors, our biases, and our illusions are born. In the next chapter, Kahneman will take us deeper into the machinery of System 1, showing how it weaves associations and stories, and how this associative machine can both illuminate and mislead our understanding of the world. Chapter 4, The Associative Machine. Imagine your mind as a vast network of paths and intersections, a dense web where ideas, memories, and sensations are connected by invisible threads. Walk down one path, and suddenly you find yourself at another intersection you did not consciously choose. This is the world of System 1, the associative machine, as Daniel Kahneman describes it. It does not reason linearly. It connects one thought to another automatically, effortlessly, creating a seamless stream of impressions, intuitions, and judgments that feel immediate and natural. System 1 is constantly at work, weaving together fragments of experience into a coherent story. When you hear a sentence, it instantly triggers associations with similar sentences you've heard before. When you see a familiar face, it recalls related memories and emotions, sometimes before you are even aware of the recognition. These associations happen without effort, without deliberation, and often without your awareness. They are the invisible engine behind intuition. Consider a simple scenario. You hear the phrase, "The man who is shy and withdrawn, with a love of detail, enjoys reading and solitary hobbies." System 1 automatically generates an impression. You might imagine a librarian, a quiet scholar, or perhaps an introverted scientist. Without checking the facts, your mind paints a vivid picture. Now, consider that the description could apply equally well to a software engineer, a writer, or even a detective. The details spark associations that feel immediate and compelling, even though they might be misleading. This is the associative machine at work, fast, effortless, and prone to fill in gaps with seemingly logical but unverified connections. Kahneman explains that the strength of the associative machine lies in coherence. System 1 strives to produce a consistent, plausible narrative from the information it receives. It does not tolerate ambiguity. It prefers stories that make sense, even if the story is partially constructed or inaccurate. This is why we are so easily persuaded by anecdotes, metaphors, and vivid imagery. When events are framed in a coherent way, System 1 responds with confidence, even in the absence of rigorous evidence. But coherence comes at a cost. The mind tends to overinterpret coincidences, seek patterns where none exist, and generate causal stories out of randomness. This is why superstitions, conspiracy theories, and urban legends thrive. They appeal to the associative machine, which is wired to connect dots and create meaning. Our intuition tells us that because two events are linked in time or space, they must be connected causally, even when no such connection exists. Kahneman also explores how the associative machine interacts with attention and effort. While System 1 generates impressions automatically, it relies on System 2 to pause, question, and verify. If System 2 is preoccupied or lazy, the associations created by System 1 are accepted uncritically. The machine constructs a story, and the mind feels satisfied with the narrative, rarely checking whether the story aligns with reality. This interplay explains why errors of judgment are so common. The fast, coherent associations of System 1 dominate our conscious experience, and the slow, effortful reasoning of System 2 intervenes too infrequently. One striking example comes from experiments on priming. Participants who are subtly exposed to words associated with old age, without realizing it, tend to walk more slowly afterward. System 1 absorbs the suggestion automatically, influencing behavior without conscious intent. This demonstrates how the associative machine not only shapes thoughts, but also subtly guides actions. Our behavior is continuously affected by associations that we do not notice, reinforcing the idea that much of the mind's activity is automatic. The associative machine also plays a role in creativity and problem solving. By connecting distant ideas, it can generate insights that seem sudden or intuitive. Yet the same machinery can mislead, producing errors in judgment, overconfidence, and illusions of understanding. Kahneman emphasizes that recognizing the power and the limits of the associative machine is key to understanding human thought. As Chapter 4 draws to a close, we see System 1 in motion, effortless, associative, coherent, and intuitive. It is a powerful engine of perception and judgment, but one that is prone to bias and error. Its stories are compelling, its connections seamless, and yet they are not always true. The next chapter, Chapter 5, Cognitive Ease, will explore how the mind's preference for familiarity and ease further shapes our perceptions, beliefs, and decisions, showing how effortlessly System 1 can lead us to misjudge the world around us. Chapter 5, Cognitive Ease. Imagine walking into a room where the lighting is soft, the air is comfortable, and the chairs are inviting. You immediately feel relaxed. Thoughts come easily. Reading a sentence requires little effort. Your mind is at ease. This is the sensation Daniel Kahneman calls cognitive ease, the mental state in which processing information feels effortless, familiar, and smooth. In contrast, cognitive strain occurs when the mind struggles to interpret, analyze, or recall information, demanding attention, energy, and deliberate focus. Cognitive ease is not just a pleasant feeling. It has profound effects on judgment and decision-making. When information is easy to process, System 1 is quick to accept it as true. Familiar statements, clear fonts, rhyming phrases, and repeated messages all generate this sense of ease, increasing confidence in their accuracy. Think of advertising slogans, news headlines, or even popular sayings. They stick in our minds not necessarily because they are factual, but because they are easy to process. The more familiar or fluent something appears, the more likely we are to believe it, even without conscious analysis. Consider an experiment in which participants read statements about historical facts. Some statements were presented in a clear, simple font, others in a harder-to-read typeface. Participants were more likely to judge the statements in the clear font as true. Why? Because ease of reading fosters a sense of familiarity, which System 1 interprets as reliability. Cognitive ease creates a heuristic shortcut. If it feels easy, it must be right. System may second be capable of checking the facts, but laziness often prevents it from intervening. Repetition is another source of cognitive ease. The more often we encounter a claim, the more easily it is processed, and the more credible it appears. This is why propaganda and advertising rely heavily on repetition. Over time, even dubious statements can seem plausible simply because they have been repeated enough to feel familiar. The associative machine of System 1 links repetition with truth, and the lazy controller of System 2 rarely questions it. Cognitive ease also influences social judgments. Faces that are easy to perceive, names that are easy to pronounce, and statements that rhyme all evoke a sense of trust and likability. Advertisers, politicians, and media use this phenomenon intuitively because the mind's preference for ease is so predictable. When something feels familiar or simple, System 1 responds positively, while System may second, not intervene to check for accuracy. Yet, cognitive ease has both benefits and costs. On the positive side, it allows the mind to operate efficiently. Familiarity, repetition, and clarity reduce the mental effort required to navigate the world. They allow System 2 to conserve energy for tasks that truly require focus. On the negative side, the preference for ease can blind us to errors, distort judgments, and amplify biases. We may accept a story because it is smoothly presented rather than because it is factually correct. We may trust a person's opinion because it is easy to remember, rather than because it is justified. Kahneman notes that cognitive strain, the opposite of ease, acts as a signal that careful thought is needed. When processing is difficult, System 2 is prompted to intervene. The mind experiences strain when a font is hard to read, when a problem is complex, or when an argument is confusing. This discomfort can motivate attention, scrutiny, and effortful reasoning. Strain signals the lazy controller to wake up. In this way, cognitive ease and strain guide the interaction between System 1 and System 2. To illustrate, imagine reading a headline in large, clear letters. Eating chocolate improves memory. System 1 immediately reacts positively. The claim feels plausible, and you might even smile. Now imagine the same claim presented in tiny, difficult-to-read font. System 1 struggles. Cognitive strain is introduced, and your mind becomes skeptical. This simple change in presentation can dramatically alter judgment, highlighting the subtle but powerful role of cognitive ease in shaping belief. As Chapter 5 concludes, we begin to see how our intuitive reactions are shaped not just by logic or evidence, but by the effortless pleasure of processing information. Cognitive ease is a gentle, pervasive force, influencing confidence, credibility, and decision-making in ways that often go unnoticed. The associative machine produces impressions, and the lazy controller may endorse them if ease makes them convincing. Understanding cognitive ease helps explain why we are so often persuaded by familiar, fluent, or repeated information, and why critical thinking requires conscious effort. In the next chapter, Chapter 6, Norms, Surprises, and Causes, Kahneman will expand on how System 1 creates expectations, how deviations generate surprise, and how our minds instinctively search for causes, setting the stage for further exploration of heuristics, biases, and judgment errors. Chapter 6, Norms, Surprises, and Causes. Imagine walking down a familiar street. You notice the usual shops, the same people, the rhythm of everyday life. Suddenly, a car drives on the sidewalk, narrowly missing a pedestrian. Your heart jumps, your attention sharpens, and your mind floods with questions. Why did this happen? Who is responsible? Could it have been prevented? This is the domain of System 1, which thrives on expectations, norms, and the instinctive search for causes. Kahneman explains that our minds are naturally tuned to detect norm violations. We are constantly predicting what is normal, what fits the expected pattern, and what aligns with our mental models of the world. When something deviates from this expectation, a surprise occurs. System 1 reacts immediately. Surprise triggers attention, arouses emotion, and motivates the mind to seek an explanation. This is not a conscious choice. It is an automatic reaction, hardwired into our cognitive architecture. For example, if you read that a normally quiet colleague suddenly shouted in a meeting, you instinctively generate potential causes, stress, frustration, or conflict. Even with limited information, your mind constructs a coherent story, filling gaps with assumptions. This capacity to infer causality is vital for survival. It allows humans to respond quickly to potential dangers and understand complex social dynamics. However, it also introduces systematic biases. The causal stories we construct may feel compelling, yet they are often incomplete, oversimplified, or incorrect. Our minds also rely on norms as a reference point. Norms are the standards we expect events to follow, whether in behavior, statistics, or everyday occurrences. When an event violates a norm, it captures attention. For example, if a restaurant chef suddenly cooked a meal in a completely unconventional way, diners would notice immediately. Norm violations generate salience, making them memorable and influential in shaping judgments, even if the deviation is trivial. Kahneman highlights that System 1 is inherently causal. When confronted with an outcome, it seeks explanations, often overinterpreting randomness. For instance, consider the stock market. Investors observe a sudden drop in a stock and immediately generate reasons: poor management, changing trends, or a market conspiracy. While some explanations may be valid, others are constructed by the associative machine of System 1, which prefers coherent stories to acknowledging randomness or uncertainty. This tendency has important implications for decision-making. People often overemphasize causality, ignoring statistical realities. We are drawn to vivid stories and compelling narratives, even when they do not accurately represent probabilities. A single dramatic event can overshadow more reliable, long-term data, simply because System 1 is captivated by the story. This explains why news media focus on rare, shocking events. They capture attention, generate surprise, and demand causal interpretation. Moreover, the search for causes can lead to illusory correlations. When two events coincide, System 1 instinctively links them, assuming causation even if there is none. For example, noticing that a friend wore a red shirt on a day they received good news may create a mental association between red clothing and luck. This causal inference feels immediate and convincing, but it is often a product of the mind's associated machinery rather than reality. Kahneman also notes that our mental responses to surprise and causality are intertwined with emotions. A violation of expectations can trigger anxiety, excitement, or curiosity, motivating System 2 to engage. Yet, due to the laziness of System 2, not all surprises are examined rationally. Often, we accept the first plausible explanation, reinforcing biases and simplifying complex realities. Reflect on your own experiences. How often have you generated explanations for events without complete information? How frequently do you recall incidents precisely because they were surprising or violated norms? This is the interplay of attention, surprise, and causality at work, a dynamic that shapes not only memory, but judgment and decision-making. As Chapter 6 concludes, we see the mind as a predictive, causal engine. System 1 constantly constructs expectations, detects deviations, and generates stories to explain the world. These processes are automatic, effortless, and largely unconscious, yet they profoundly influence our perceptions, beliefs, and choices. Understanding this mechanism prepares us for the next chapter, Chapter 7, A Machine for Jumping to Conclusions, where Kahneman will reveal how these tendencies can lead to overconfidence, snap judgments, and systematic errors in reasoning. Chapter 7, A Machine for Jumping to Conclusions. Imagine a courtroom where evidence is scarce, the witnesses are nervous, and the facts are incomplete. Yet a verdict is delivered swiftly, sometimes with surprising confidence. Why? Because the human mind, as Kahneman explains, is a machine for jumping to conclusions. System 1, the fast thinker, thrives on immediacy. It is designed to respond quickly, forming judgments and impressions with minimal information. While this mechanism allows humans to navigate daily life efficiently, it also exposes us to errors, biases, and overconfidence. System 1 does not deliberate. It does not pause to gather all the facts or weigh probabilities carefully. Instead, it constructs a coherent narrative from the information available, however limited, filling in gaps with assumptions, intuitions, and prior experiences. For example, if you hear that a person is quiet, enjoys reading, and is meticulous, System 1 immediately generates an impression of the individual, perhaps a librarian, a scientist, or a solitary artist. You feel certain about this conclusion, even though the evidence is minimal and could support many alternatives. Kahneman emphasizes that this tendency is not a flaw, but an evolutionary adaptation. Quick judgments were often crucial for survival. Recognizing a predator from a rustle in the bushes, interpreting subtle social cues, or assessing threats in a complex environment required immediate responses. System 1 evolved to provide fast, intuitive judgments that are usually correct in typical contexts. The problem arises when these mechanisms are applied to complex, modern situations where careful reasoning is needed. One of the key features of System 1 is its confidence. Once an impression is formed, it feels convincing. This sense of certainty is a product of coherence, not accuracy. System 1 prefers consistent, simple stories, and when it finds one, it trusts it. Even if System 2, the slow, deliberate thinker, is capable of detecting errors, its laziness often allows the intuitive conclusion to stand unchecked. As a result, people can feel highly confident about judgments that are only partially informed or even incorrect. Consider a scenario in which a friend tells you about a colleague who is friendly, intelligent, and likes classical music. Without hesitation, System 1 produces an image of a cultured, thoughtful person. You may even make decisions based on this impression, assuming competence, reliability, or preferences, despite having no real evidence. Kahneman calls attention to this mechanism because it explains so many of the errors humans make, overestimating understanding, misjudging probabilities, and forming strong beliefs from weak evidence. Experiments highlight this phenomenon. Participants are shown brief descriptions of people and asked to predict behavior, preferences, or outcomes. Despite limited information, participants consistently produce confident judgments. Their confidence is not based on statistical reasoning or systematic analysis, but on the ease with which System 1 constructs a coherent story. The mind equates fluency with truth, and the fast thinker thrives on minimal data. This chapter also connects to the previous discussion of norms, surprises, and cognitive ease. When events align with expectations or are presented smoothly, System 1 leaps to conclusions even faster. Deviations, while attracting attention, may still lead to rapid causal stories that are not fully verified. The human mind craves narrative coherence. It prefers to explain, simplify, and assign causes, even in the face of uncertainty. The implications are far-reaching. Snap judgments affect everyday decisions, from choosing whom to trust, hiring an employee, interpreting news stories, to making financial or medical choices. Kahneman warns that recognizing this tendency is crucial for developing critical thinking. Awareness of System 1's propensity to jump to conclusions allows System 2 to intervene, check assumptions, and engage in deliberate reasoning when necessary. Chapter 8. How Judgments Happen. Imagine yourself walking into a busy airport terminal. Travelers bustle about. Announcements echo across the hall. Luggage wheels squeak, and the air carries a mix of perfume, coffee, and travel fatigue. Amidst this chaos, you are asked to judge whether a certain person, someone you barely know, is trustworthy, competent, or friendly. Remarkably, your mind forms a judgment almost instantly. You have observed only a brief expression, a posture, perhaps the way they speak, yet System 1 produces an impression that feels immediate and reliable. This is the essence of how judgments happen. Fast, intuitive, and often unconscious. Kahneman explains that most of the time, System 1 is the primary engine behind our judgments. It continuously scans the environment, interprets patterns, and produces impressions and feelings that guide decision-making. System 2, the slower and deliberate processor, can step in to evaluate, adjust, or override, but it often remains passive. The result is that our judgments are largely influenced by automatic processes, which are remarkably efficient but prone to bias. One of the key insights of this chapter is the coherence of impressions. Once System 1 generates an initial impression, the mind seeks to maintain a consistent story. Even if some evidence contradicts this first impression, the brain tends to reinterpret, downplay, or ignore the contradiction to preserve coherence. This explains why first impressions are so powerful, and why once we form a belief about someone or something, we are inclined to defend it, even in the face of conflicting evidence. Consider a classic experiment described by Kahneman. Participants were given brief descriptions of fictitious individuals along with personality traits. Then they were asked to make predictions about behavior, preferences, or life outcomes. Even though the participants had minimal information, they felt confident in their judgments. The coherence of the small details was enough to trigger System 1's intuition, and System 2 rarely challenged these judgments. Confidence was high, but accuracy was limited. Another phenomenon Kahneman highlights is the illusion of validity. We tend to trust judgments when the information fits a coherent pattern, even if the pattern is based on randomness or small samples. A stockbroker may feel certain about an investment because a few recent trends align neatly, ignoring the broader statistical context. Similarly, people often believe they understand complex events after reading a compelling narrative, even though the underlying reality is uncertain. System 1 finds stories compelling, and System 2, lazy and occupied with other tasks, allows the impression to stand unexamined. Kahneman also discusses the role of affect in judgment. Feelings generated by System 1, such as liking, trust, fear, or enthusiasm, serve as a shortcut for evaluation. When an idea or person evokes a positive feeling, we are more likely to judge them favorably. When negative emotions arise, judgment skews the other way. These affective reactions are instantaneous and effortless, guiding decisions before rational analysis even begins. Furthermore, Kahneman emphasizes that judgments are highly context-dependent. A person's competence or trustworthiness is not an absolute property, but is interpreted relative to expectations, norms, and the surrounding environment. System 1 automatically compares new information to stored patterns and past experiences, generating an impression that feels valid, even if it may be misleading in objective terms. Reflect on your own experiences. How often have you made snap judgments about people, events, or ideas that later turn out to be incorrect? How often did you feel confident in your assessment, only to realize that more information would have drastically changed your perspective? These examples illustrate the constant interplay between fast, intuitive impressions and slow, deliberate reasoning. As Chapter 8 concludes, the picture becomes clear. Our judgments are constructed, not merely retrieved. They emerge from a dance between System 1's automatic impressions and System 2's occasionally engaged scrutiny. The mind seeks coherence, favors fluency, and often relies on effective cues, creating judgments that feel immediate, compelling, and certain, even when they are vulnerable to error. The next chapter, Chapter 9, Answering an Easier Question, will explore how the mind often substitutes a simpler question for a more difficult one, revealing yet another way our intuitive judgments can mislead us. Chapter 9, Answering an Easier Question. Imagine being asked a difficult question. How happy are you with your life overall? Your mind hesitates for a moment, trying to retrieve memories, compare experiences, and weigh outcomes. The question is complex, abstract, and emotionally charged. Now, without realizing it, your mind substitutes it with a simpler question. What is my mood right now? This effortless swap happens automatically, guided by System 1, the fast, intuitive thinker, and it illustrates the principle Kahneman calls substitution, our tendency to answer an easier question when faced with a hard one. Substitution occurs because engaging System 2, the slow, deliberate processor, is mentally costly. Deliberation requires attention, memory, and cognitive effort. When confronted with a question that is difficult, uncertain, or abstract, the mind often defaults to a proxy, a related but simpler question that System 1 can handle quickly. The answer feels immediate, confident, and even rational, but it may not truly reflect the original inquiry. Consider an experiment in which participants were asked to judge whether a public figure was competent. Instead of evaluating objective records or accomplishments, a cognitively demanding task, the participants often substituted the question, "Do I like this person?" Or, does this person feel familiar? Their judgments of competence were heavily influenced by affect, mood, or exposure, demonstrating how easily System 1 guides answers without thorough reasoning. Kahneman highlights that substitution is pervasive in human thinking. From everyday life to political decisions, financial choices, and social judgments, the mind constantly simplifies difficult problems. We answer questions about risk by asking, how easily can I recall similar events? We judge probabilities by considering vivid examples rather than performing statistical reasoning. We evaluate the fairness of outcomes based on immediate emotional reactions rather than careful analysis. Substitution is an adaptive shortcut. It allows us to navigate a complex world efficiently, but also opens the door to systematic errors. The chapter emphasizes the role of affect in substitution. When a question is hard, System 1 often relies on feelings, impressions, and immediate experiences to construct an answer. This explains why advertisements, headlines, and persuasive messages often target emotions rather than rational analysis. They exploit the mind's natural tendency to substitute the easy for the hard, guiding judgments through effective cues. For instance, when people are asked about the risk of a rare disaster, they often answer a simpler question: how vivid or memorable is this event? Rather than calculating true probabilities. This reliance on ease of recall or emotional impact can lead to overestimation of dramatic but unlikely events, such as plane crashes, shark attacks, or terrorist incidents, while underestimating common but less memorable risks. Substitution also occurs in social and moral judgments. We may be asked, is this policy just? And unconsciously answer, do I like the people proposing it? Or do I feel comfortable with the idea? System 1 produces an answer effortlessly. System 2 rarely intervenes, and yet the response feels rational, coherent, and confident. Understanding this process reveals why people often defend positions that are intuitively appealing but logically weak. Kahneman urges reflection. Recognizing when substitution occurs allows us to pause, engage System 2, and examine whether the answer truly addresses the question at hand. The mind's automatic tendency to simplify is powerful and adaptive, but unchecked, it can lead to predictable biases, errors in judgment, and overconfidence. As Chapter 9 concludes, we see a central theme of Part 1 crystallize. Human thinking is a dynamic interplay between fast, intuitive judgments, System 1, and slow, effortful reasoning, System 2. System 1 produces impressions, constructs stories, and often substitutes simpler questions for complex ones, while System 2 has the capacity to intervene, but too often remains lazy. Understanding these mechanisms lays the foundation for recognizing biases, errors, and illusions that pervade human thought. As we reach the end of Part 1, a vivid picture of the human mind emerges, one that is both remarkable and humbling. Daniel Kahneman has guided us through the intricate dance of System 1 and System 2, revealing how our thoughts, judgments, and decisions are shaped by their interplay. System 1, the fast, intuitive, and associative thinker, operates effortlessly, producing impressions, generating stories, and answering questions with immediacy and confidence. System 2, the slow, deliberate, and rational controller, possesses the capacity to analyze, reflect, and correct, but often it is reluctant to intervene, weighed down by the mental effort required. Throughout the 9 chapters of Part 1, we have witnessed this dynamic in action. System 1, with its associative machine, creates coherence, seeks patterns, and forms judgments even from scant information. It leaps to conclusions, substitutes easier questions for difficult ones, and is influenced by cognitive ease, familiarity, affect, and context. System 2, capable of scrutiny and rational thought, frequently defers, allowing intuition to dominate. This interplay explains why humans are prone to biases, overconfidence, and errors, yet also why we navigate the complexity of life with remarkable speed and efficiency. We have explored how judgments arise from the seamless operation of these two systems, from the power of first impressions to the subtle influence of fluency and repetition. We have seen how the mind prefers coherence over accuracy, how surprise and norm violations capture attention, and how intuitive answers often feel convincing even when they are flawed. Kahneman challenges us to recognize these patterns within ourselves, to notice when we rely on fast thinking without adequate scrutiny, and to appreciate the mental effort required to engage System 2. Part 1 lays the foundation for understanding the machinery of thought. It invites us to pause, reflect, and consider the hidden forces that shape our decisions, emotions, and beliefs. It reminds us that our confidence in judgment is often a reflection of coherence and fluency, not necessarily of truth. By becoming aware of the strengths and limitations of the two systems, we gain insight into the human mind, insight that can guide us toward better thinking, wiser decisions, and a more nuanced understanding of ourselves and the world around us. As we prepare to move into Part 2, we will delve deeper into the systematic errors of judgment, the heuristics that guide our intuition, and the cognitive illusions that shape perception. The journey ahead promises to reveal even more about the mind's remarkable yet fallible nature, and how awareness of these processes can help us navigate complexity with clarity and care. With this reflection, Part 1 closes, a portrait of human thought and motion, of a mind that is at once swift, creative, intuitive, and surprisingly vulnerable.